A pleasure to me all at last, and welcome back to Films I Should Have Talked About Years Ago. And now, why don't we go ahead and get on to sequels yet again. This time, I'm going to refer back to when I made the first ever episode of this season of Films I Should Have Talked About Years Ago, to where I talked about the famous Keanu Reeves film from the mid-90s known as Speed. In 1997, it actually got a sequel, Speed 2: Cruise Control. Now, first of all, let's talk a bit about the title itself. Speed 2. That's pretty much consistent, and it definitely is more or less a sequel that happens to not retcon anything, not redo anything, or rewrite anything, or take us back to the past, or any other sort of weird thing that would just confuse the crap out of us. So, you have the number placement, but what about the subtitle, Cruise Control? Because what we have here is something that is in fact a lot different than you would have realized. Instead of a bus, it's a ship sailing the waters. So, cruise control? Really? That attributes to a specialized function found in most cars and trucks that can automatically allow them to drive on their own at a preset speed. So, again, if they're really trying their way to simply get a nice semantics or play on words, then they are more than just sorry. Beyond the point of apologizing even, because it really makes zero sense at this point. Cruise control? Like, really? That attributes to cars and trucks, not boats. But, anyways, apart from that, the movie is more or less just a sequel, and Watch Mojo actually goes as far to call it one of the worst sequels of the 90s. And so, I don't know exactly where I could begin with this, but I actually saw it a while ago, and I did give it another watch just recently, so I could have the chance to talk about this with as much info fresh in my mind as possible. So, Speed 2: Cruise Control starts with the same old Sandra Bullock, whom you remember from the first movie. She was captured by Dennis Hopper and held hostage for a while until Keanu Reeves steps in, saves the day, defeats Hopper by pushing him up against the ceiling of a subway, and then bam, his head gets decapitated. But in this instance, let's just say Keanu Reeves took a bit of a break from some things. He's not even in this movie. Instead, it's actor Jason Patric. This is pretty much the same exact thing that had happened with Darkman 2. If you remember when I've talked about Darkman, and then Darkman 2, and then Darkman 3, well, you probably know that Arnold Vosloo would take over the role of Liam Neeson's own character known as Dr. Peyton Westlake, as well as Darkman himself. But in this instance, this might have been preferred, the sequels to Darkman, but I feel like that it just simply set the bar to the fact that sequels can be rather deceptive when showing off the acting here. The cast themselves in some movie sequels actually can be swapped out into ways that are more than just painfully obvious. I mean, you have Jason Patric playing the same exact role as Keanu Reeves did. What's even worse is that, I mean, it's just the fact that it's so obvious. They look completely different from each other. To me, that's really the fatal flaw in this film. Because right off the bat, we do get to see the amazing officer from the first film who was able to completely thwart a huge threat. A bomb was put on a bus in the first movie, and if it went past 50 miles per hour, it could detonate if it's ever slowed down. Reeves was able to pull this off so well in the first movie that I couldn't possibly stand to understand that the sequel apparently did so bad with this. Like, where was Reeves? Where did he go? Was he on the set of a talk show at the time this movie was being made? Was he on a podcast? Was he reading a book in the upstairs bedroom of his own apartment? Yeah, maybe I'm just going too far with the analogies here, but that's because I demand answers here to these questions. A lot of them. Jason Patric had zero reason to play the same character he did. The least they could have done was just simply go as far to explain that Reese's character was like out of town or something. That's what they could have done that would have made the movie a million times better. But no. That's not what happened. Anyways, what happens here is that in the very beginning of the movie, Sandra Bullock herself is actually in a driving test, driving around in a VW Thing. Yeah, that's literally the name of the car. It's a Volkswagen Thing, or Type 181 if you prefer. But the thing is, she actually does pretty bad at the driving test. Meanwhile, the officer that Jason Patric ends up playing, I mean, he himself kind of puts up a decent action scene, pretty much with a huge motorcycle going after some criminals who are in a getaway car. Of course, what happens is that both he and Sandra, they both cross paths with each other at the site of where the getaway car would eventually tumble around and the criminals would eventually be apprehended. But of course, when they do get to see each other again, especially a while after what had happened with Dennis Hopper, pretty much in the first movie, they do talk a few things out and they try to organize a date of some sorts. And eventually they come to a bit of an agreement to where they can meet up on a cruise ship that they could probably go down together on as a nice romantic getaway. Unfortunately though, this cruise ship was actually the target of another terrorist. This, in fact, unlike with what we saw with Dennis Hopper, actually stars the likes of Academy Award-winning actor Willem Dafoe. That's right, the famous Appleton, Wisconsin man himself. Basically, this was before he ever became Green Goblin or any of the other iconic roles he's ever been a part of since that point in time. But here in Speed 2 Cruise Control, he basically plays a man who plans on taking over a cruise ship by planting bombs all around and simply utilizing this ship to coordinate an effort to strike on humanity. So it's very much like what we've seen with the first movie here, but the fact is that Dennis Hopper was able to create an epic stunt series that went down with the first movie. A Greyhound bus simply jumping off the highway and cruising around at high speeds. It was more than just brilliant. For a lot of stunts that were pulled off so well, we couldn't even tell where to begin here. To a certain extent, however, I will say that, to be fair, the fact that they could try and amp up the stakes by trying to give us a cruise ship, what could you possibly do to plant bombs on a cruise ship? And if there was a certain function that you did, the bombs would be armed, and they could possibly detonate if certain things happened. Well, of course, that actually does play out, so at least they managed to do that right. They amped the stakes by having another guy who's played by another really well-known actor, by today's standards at least. He plants bombs on the ship, and the ship itself is basically loaded to the fullest possible capacity. The highest decks even have a lot of people on board. So again, the stakes here, the fact that they raised them up so much by having a cruise ship full of people as opposed to a bus full of people, I'd say that actually chalks up a lot of potential success. As I've said before though, Jason Patric's inclusion as the same character that was played by Keanu Reeves from the first film, the same officer who thwarted Dennis Hopper's attempt to cause terrorism, is a fatal flaw. End of story.